What are the potential fantasy football implications of the big changes coming at quarterback and free agency and trades? It's time to find out right here and right now as we start previewing the NFL offseason on Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer, and when I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. We're wrapping up Super Bowl 56. We know it was the Rams over the Bengals. We looked at Super Bowl 57 odds, looking at the values there that were available ahead of next year in terms of the gambling aspect. Now we're going to go back to fantasy football here, and we're going to do a series. That's what we do a lot in the offseason here to get your advanced scouting just done right here until we have to pick teams there in August. So long way to go, but it starts right now. A lot of things are going to change, especially at quarterback. We're going to look at that. The landscape of fantasy football is different now. Tom Brady is not in play anymore. Ben Roethlisberger is not there as well. He's retired. So a lot of teams changing. So what we'll do first is look at the openings and the situations there that teams most likely to change their quarterbacks. Then we'll get into the quarterbacks on the board here. Now, the actual free agents that are unsigned are not that appealing for fantasy football. A lot of backup guys, a lot of bridge type guys as usual. But the more interesting thing is the guys that can be on the move on the trading block. And that's a big part. We know free agency is part and parcel of that. So we'll break that down for you over our three segments. So then first looking at the situations we're looking at most here for most fantasy football value for the right quarterback, whether he's a veteran or rookie. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We're free and available for you on all platforms. All right, let us dive in here. So let's kind of look at the situations here and where quarterbacks can really succeed here in the NFL. So big void. We'll start with the two situations where we had Tom Brady and Ben Roethlisberger. They're changing teams here. So Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, I was getting a little bit ahead of myself on Aaron Rodgers, but right now we know Brady and Roethlisberger are not coming back. Those are the known variables, and there's not a lot that are there for us at this position at this point in the offseason. We know the elite teams, they're fine. We know the Chiefs and Bills and Bengals, Chargers, those teams are all going to roll out the same quarterbacks. But Tampa has a massive void here. Chris Godwin is a concern. He is a free agent. We'll talk about him and when we break down the wide receivers that are available here. But Tampa's in a pretty good spot there for a quarterback to step in there and be successful. You've got a pretty good offensive line. We know that with Tristan Wirfs and Donovan Smith. If Godwin can return, you have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. We'll see about the tight end situation here. Though Jay Howard and Robert Gronkowski will be free agent, but good receivers right off the bat. Rashad Perriman is back in the mix. You have Tyler Johnson, Jalen Darden, Scotty Miller. So even without Antonio Brown, you have a lot of options. They got to figure out what they're doing in the backfield. Leonard Fournette's a free agent, as well as Giovanni Bernard and Le'Veon Bell and Ronald Jones. So they got to figure things there. Do they turn the page simply and go with Keyshawn Vaughn here, or keep Fournette and Vaughn, and that's the way they move on? So there's a lot of things that the Bucs need to figure out around the quarterback, but you start with Evans and Godwin. That's a very good place. So we're going to watch that team, especially there going after veteran quarterback. Same thing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. You look at their situation. The offensive line, not nearly as good. It's actually a liability there in Pittsburgh. But you look at the skill players, Chase Claypool coming off a down year, partly because of Roethlisberger's noodle arm there that was in his last season of his career. You have Deontay Johnson coming off a big year as a wide receiver one with his consistent production here. So good player there. James Washington, not a bad option there right now, is number 3 at Pat Freiermuth there at tight end. Don't forget about Juju Smith-Schuster. He could be re-signed on a cheap deal to return for the slot between Johnson and Claypool. So could have a lot of weapons there. And then Najee Harris out of the backfield, great receiver there at that position, as well as the running to help set up the downfield passing. So Yeah, Tampa and Pittsburgh, very appealing for a veteran quarterback because I think they're teams that can win now. Obviously, Tampa was right there. We saw what happened with Brady. The Steelers were a playoff team, even with Roethlisberger struggling. So those are two teams that I think the veteran quarterbacks are going to be circling most there to get into contention. Now, don't forget about the Washington football team. I look at some of their weapons: Terry McLaurin, Antonio Gibson, at their main guys, Logan Thomas. You got DeAndre Carter, some other guys that could be helpful at wide receiver. Curtis Samuel, I think, could have a bigger role next year. Some good speed on this team for sure around the quarterback. So Washington could shore up the offensive line a bit. They have to worry about Brandon Sheriff being a free agent at guard, so that's a concern. But the tackles need to be addressed there in the nation's capital. For the Commanders, the football team is now the Commanders, and they need a commander there on the field there to take over from Taylor Heineke. We can't imagine they'll go into next year with Taylor Heineke there as a quarterback. Ryan Fitzpatrick, we'll see about him returning as a bridge option that Washington had been excited about at one point, but turned the page to Heineke, made it do. But another very appealing team for the quarterback. Scott Turner's offense playing off the Ron Rivera defense on the other side with Jack Del Rio. So, yeah, Washington a little bit underrated there as a destination because, again, the NFC East, Cowboys won it, but Eagles, mediocre playoff team, and the Giants are way down there right now rebuilding with Brian Dable. So Washington's going to have appeal, too, as the gateway to the playoffs for a veteran quarterback. The Denver Broncos, they also have some appeal here. We know who's tied to them most, and Aaron Rodgers, but you look at that team, got good receivers all around. I talked to Noah Fant at the Super Bowl for Sporting News, and he thought the potential was really great here. Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton locked into longer contracts. Jerry Jeudy, don't forget they have a pretty good offensive line anchored by their left tackle Garrett Bowles. So, yeah, Bucs, Steelers, Washington, Denver, very appealing spots here for these quarterbacks in play that may be on the move. We'll talk about them in our next segment there for you. Less appealing teams, the Panthers. Right now, looks like they'll stick with Sam Darnold. Got to change their offensive line. It was terrible last year. We'll see about Robbie Anderson as the number 2 there. He is a free agent, so it could be Terrace Marshall Jr. with DJ Moore there for the Panthers, with Christian McCaffrey being a big part of their offense again, assuming Christian McCaffrey's healthy. Otherwise, you have Chuba Hubbard. So a little less appeal there for Panthers and a rookie-year veteran QB. Detroit, we saw the numbers, not terrible here. They have some weapons. Amon-Ra St. Brown really came on there as a wide receiver 2. DeAndre Swift out of the backfield was an RB2. So they've got some things. TJ Hawkinson, when he's healthy, the receivers are not bad overall. Quintus Cephas, if he comes back healthy. So they'll upgrade, you figure, at wide receiver as well. So, and Lions have a few things to work with, but I don't think they're necessarily going to force transitioning from Jared Goff. Here with a veteran, I think they'll probably use that second first-round pick, which is now number 32 overall, to address quarterback. If not using number 2, I think it's more likely they'll use number 32, the one they acquired from the Rams, who now is the last pick in the round as the Rams are Super Bowl champs. All right, let's look at the New Orleans Saints. I mean, the biggest question mark here is Teron Armstead's a free agent, so they got to worry about left tackle. They got Michael Thomas. Is he going to be returned to be effective? No real receivers here. You got to worry about Jameis Winston being a free agent. Is he worth coming back? Is Taysom Hill incentivized in his contract guy here? So a lot of things to sort out there with the Saints. And then finally, a team that probably needs a quarterback. We'll see if they stick with Davis Mills. I want to give him more of a chance. They might work on their offensive line, skill positions here instead, and defensive rebuilding there for the Texans. But something to watch out with Davis Mills and the rest there. But those are the teams that are quite obvious that need replacement. That's 8 teams, folks. So a quarter of the NFL needs some quarterback addressing. So putting that in play, those are the free agent and trade destinations for some potential quarterbacks. So the contender is a lot more appealing than the other teams. Now, we'll get into the top quarterbacks in play that are not specifically free agents, and we'll break it down all the way and see what their value could be, whether they stay put on their teams or go elsewhere here in 2022. But first, I got to tell you, you got to check out BetOnline. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full season for both pro and college hoops. We know the March tournament is just around the corner. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's just not basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right to the Olympics coverage and information. We still have some time with that. Head to the website today, use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, it's time to continue the show looking at the top trade block quarterbacks, and these are the top quarterbacks available. We'll get into the free agents that I've ranked there at sportingnews.com. I have a list of the top 50 overall, best by position. We'll continue breaking that down tomorrow with the running backs there, wide receivers and tight ends. We'll close the week there as options for teams here in 2022. And we're interested to see where these guys might go so we know what their value could be. So let's start with the biggest name on the board. It's Aaron Rodgers here. What's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers? Right now, I think it's either the Packers staying there. Devontae Adams needs to be franchise tag or locked up with a free agent contract here, lucrative extension. But Rodgers, I think he's staying put. He still is under contract here. The Packers are still knocking on the door here, winning the NFC and the Super Bowl. So right now, to me, it's either the Packers for Aaron Rodgers or the Denver Broncos. We know they hired Nathaniel Hackett and Justin Outen. They're the tight ends coach of the Packers. These guys both worked under Matt LaFleur. So, yeah, it's pretty obvious the Broncos are making a play for Aaron Rodgers. We looked at the betting odds. The Broncos were extremely boosted because of Rodgers' status here. So, very interesting that Rodgers and that team will be tied when you have Chiefs and Mahomes and the Chargers and Herbert. But, yeah, it's all lining up. That would be the most logical destination. Now, the Jets is way outside the box, but they could move on and say, Zach Wilson, we're going to wait for you. We're going to try to win now with Aaron Rodgers. It is a familiar offense there with Mike LaFleur running some things. So that's a team to watch. Maybe the 49ers would get aggressive and do something weird with Trey Lance, but these are all long shots in the dark. The Buccaneers seem to be in play as well for Aaron Rodgers, just because he knows he can win a championship with this team. If Tom Brady can do it in this offense, he certainly can. And with the rest of the pieces there. And the Bucs also might be aggressive, knowing that they still have a winning team intact there. So some destinations to watch, but I would say right now it's pretty heavy that he'll be back with the Packers, next with the Broncos, and then if any other team would be in the play, it'll be the Buccaneers. Now let's go to Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson's a bit of a wild card. I actually saw him on the street there, with Ciara. He was still creating buzz. He was still wearing some Seattle gear there at one of the party situations I went to. So he was out in the street, a lot of buzz. Seahawks fans were excited to see him represent Seattle with his gear. So again, does that say anything that he's going to stay there with the team and going to be happy with the Pete Carroll relationship, or does he stay and want Pete Carroll out? Will Pete Carroll step away and move on somewhere else? Right now, I think Wilson and Carroll are staying together. That would be the favorite in the clubhouse for the Seahawks there. So Wilson should stay, and we know he's a pretty good fantasy quarterback. He could have done a little bit better with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett this year, but really anywhere he goes, he'll be productive. So the Steelers and Washington were two teams I threw out for him. Maybe Denver also would be interested in Wilson if they can't land Rodgers. But the Steelers and Washington, they also pick late in the first round. And then you have the New Orleans Saints, who also do that because they were on the cusp of being a wild card team in the NFC. So Russell Wilson, interesting. I think Seattle and the field are pretty much even, but Seattle has a little bit of a lean here. But the field means that there's no definitive other place for Wilson to go. That makes the Seahawks return even stronger here. So Wilson, if he gets there, I think you look at 100% as a way to stay in the lineup. Now, the other thing you look at here is Russell Wilson and Rodgers, but you also have Deshaun Watson. Is he going to be cleared? We don't know, but we know Watson is an instant QB1 should he land somewhere there. Here in free agency, looking more of a trade with him. The Texans have to move on here in some form. They need to get something from him. Maybe some team will take a chance on him. Watson being cleared, he's going to be another big prize that's going to be a lot easier to get than Rodgers and Wilson. So obviously anywhere Watson lands, he's a top end QB1. Kyler Murray disappointed a bit as a QB1. I don't think he's going to go anywhere. There's rumors about the Cardinals and breaking up, but don't worry about him. He's staying put. Jimmy Garoppolo is going to move on, and that will be a third, fourth option for these teams looking for veterans. Maybe he ends up in Tampa. They're replacing Tom Brady. That would be kind of an interesting twist here if they can't have big assets to trade. Washington is also a possibility with Turner. So a lot of places where Jimmy Garoppolo can land here and be effective, maybe even as the backup to Zach Wilson. Obviously, you wouldn't have any fancy value there. Also, look out for the Saints for Garoppolo because he can grasp that offense, play off that running game pretty well to Alvin Kamara, and they'll upgrade wide receiver to help him there as well. Ryan Tannehill, I don't think he's going to go anywhere. There was talk about it. The Titans would replace him, but I think Derrick Henry is going to be the man here. So looking at the situation, Tannehill, one more year on the contract, hard to get out of that. I don't think Kirk Cousins is quite leaving the Vikings here. They have too much invested in him as well. So he's not there. Derek Carr is someone intriguing because Josh McDaniels may want to go a different direction at quarterback. They could address that position in the first round. So Carr been pretty solid, efficient. They got in the playoffs. You think they're going to keep him, but he's still QB2 in fantasy. So Tannehill, borderline QB1, more in the QB2 category, going in that direction. There, Carr more still in QB2. Jimmy Garoppolo off the fantasy football radar. Daniel Jones has some appeal here, I think. Do I want him to go anywhere else? I mean, the Giants do have some weapons. Kadarius Toney, Saquon Barkley, maybe Kenny Galladay will be a little bit better than Brian Dable offense here with Mike Kafka coming over from the Chiefs, so more of a big playability. So this offense should have a lot more upside. They will probably address the offensive line. They got multiple picks in the top 10 here. They already have a pretty good offensive tackle in Andrew Thomas. Get a few more skill players. Get that line short up. You got Barkley to dump off to. Watch out for Daniel Jones. So if Daniel Jones goes elsewhere, I think there's some places that could have some value for him. So we'll watch in some of these teams like the Bucks or Steelers, Saints, if they're seeing someone cheap that they can acquire with first round pedigree and want to go in that direction, you can go Daniel Jones. But I think Daniel Jones is a sleeper to watch in fantasy in that Dable offense, and I think he'll most likely stay put with the Giants here in 2022. All right, we will break down the actual free agent quarterbacks and what those teams might be thinking here. The guys that are unsigned for 2022 don't have to be traded for and all that. We'll do that in our final segment. But first, I got to tell you about Rock Auto. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With their increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless, seemingly intimidating questioning? Wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry. You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home in your pocket. Save time and money when using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, and 100% more for the same parts from a chain store car dealership? Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything you need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even carpet. So check it out. Go to the site, find your own auto parts needs, and see how Rock Auto can help you there. Go explore their easy-to-use website today and find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right locked on there. How did you hear about this box that they sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. That's rockauto.com. All right, it's time to close the show looking at the actual free agent quarterbacks and if they have a chance to go somewhere and start here in 2022. Number one on my board is Jameis Winston. Had a pretty good year early with the Saints, playing off the running game. Then he tore his knee, so that's going to be a question. He could return to the Saints and be their option. Interesting, I talked to Cam Jordan as part of Super Bowl week, and he hinted that Winston would be their guy. He said, we're looking forward to what we can do with Winston in year two. So maybe the Saints won't be in play at all. They might not have a choice here because they were a bad salary cap situation here in 2022. So something to factor as well. Marcus Mariota can get out of the Raiders situation. Maybe he'll get a chance with the Raiders, and McDaniels will open up the competition there. But Mariota has some appeal. Like, I think he's a good rebound candidate somewhere in a favorable offense. I think right now probably has appeal as a backup quarterback in many situations. Maybe Washington could look at him as a starter with his mobility and all that. So Mariota, I'm very intrigued by. I still think he has something left in the tank here if he gets a second chance somewhere where it's favorable that he could come off the bench and start. Mitchell Trubisky is also going to have some appeal for some. I mean, you have a lot of people in the Chief system, so maybe you look at, say, the Giants, and they want someone to hedge their bets with Daniel Jones. They could look at Trubisky here with Brian Dable in town. Good look at Chicago, maybe returning to backup Justin Fields. Would not surprise me. You also have Doug Peterson down in Jacksonville, so maybe get him down there with Trevor Lawrence. So some situations to definitely watch with Trubisky. Ryan Fitzpatrick, we mentioned him. We'll see if Washington wants to bring him back. The Commanders, however, Taylor Heineke, Ryan Fitzpatrick, if they want to catch up, they got to change their quarterback situation. So I would expect they move on from Fitzpatrick, but I could see him land in a place where he could be an effective bridge. Pittsburgh is a team that's been mentioned here for Fitzpatrick to play off the defense, and that would be interesting for sure, given all the weapons the Steelers have. Teddy Bridgewater, I don't know where he's going to end up here. Didn't work out with the Panthers, didn't work out with the Broncos. Could he return to Minnesota? I don't know. He's been to the Jets, remember that as well. It just has not been the right breaks here for Bridgewater the last 2 seasons. He also hasn't been on the radar for fantasy. So really, right now, the guys that have appeal are Winston and Fitzpatrick for the most part. To have former Buccaneers quarterbacks here that you look at, but Bridgewater doesn't have a lot of appeal. Mariota and Trubisky only if they end up in positions to compete and start. And then finally, it's Colt McCoy, the Cardinals. So that tells you there's not a lot out there, but Colt McCoy did have to start games for the Cardinals. We'll see about the Kyler Murray situation there. And if they want to bring in someone to compete or a veteran alternative there, that would not surprise me here for this team. So a lot of things to watch out here with free agent quarterbacks and traded quarterbacks. A lot more excitement there on that front here in 2022, as we usually had it. We had Tom Brady move a couple years ago. Phillip Rivers also moved then in the 2020 offseason. And last year, Matthew Stafford was a big change and put up some big numbers. So he was a QB1 in his change from the Lions to the Rams. So we're going to always be tracking these guys, big names on the move for sure, quarterback with some of the situations there. And navigating veterans versus rookies, that's what all these QB-needy teams need to do. It kind of starts a quarterback carousel that we have to be on top of for fantasy football. What are the best situations and to attack them based on the changes. All right. Thanks so much for listening to Locked On Fantasy Football and making us your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On Bets. Take a look at those NFL futures, things that are happening in other sports there. Hosted by your boy Q and featuring the expert analysis of one Lee Sterling. So your boy Q, Lee Sterling, good job there on the gambling side of things all across the sports. Checking them out on Locked On Bets. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this is Vinnie Iyer. We'll be back tomorrow to break down the running back free agency situation there for 2022 NFL offseason.